Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, September 27th, 2021. Time for another show. I'm not fully recovered from last week's cold, so that makes it this week's cold as well. But things are considerably better. Certainly no pain and discomfort in getting behind the microphone today. Just a little congestion, and we're working on it, and we'll see what sort of over-the-counter pharmaceuticals can do about it. Plenty of cough syrup to go around. Yes, Bill has asked in his Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now Twitter post. It says that I have said that I'm on cough syrup this morning. I cheated a little bit. I had it last night. But anyway, he asks, well, I hope I brought enough for the rest of the class. And the answer is, sure I did. Hold on just a second. I like cough syrup, okay? Put me on the Supreme Court. Leave me alone, all right? Anyway, the syrup, it's terrible. It was like generic NyQuil. NyQuil tastes bad enough as it is. Making generic NyQuil. Yeah, make sure it doesn't taste like the original, because then we'll get sued. You should get sued for what it tastes like now, quite honestly. But I guess that's to make it so that you don't enjoy taking it too much. Because if it was like, I don't know, pina colada or something, I guess you'd be, well, why would you go to the bar, for instance? You could just stay here and have cough syrup and sleep the afternoons away. Okay, well, things are on the mend, I think. And, well, you know, it's enough. We can make it through the show. Plus, of course, we have Greg Dworkin all set to join us today. So that'll be nice, too. Just a nice little crutch to get back on track after the weekend. Did anything happen over the weekend? I don't remember. I started watching TV, and then I can't remember what happened. So we'll check in with Greg and with Pocket and remind ourselves of the things that happened over the weekend. Lots to catch up on, things we didn't get to last week, things that we started on last week. Facebook continues to have a terrible time of it, which is fine by me. Great. I don't care. I never liked it in the first place. Plus, as it turns out, they're a bunch of scumbags. So what the hell? They may as well have a terrible week. We didn't even get to all the things that made their week terrible last week, and there's more on top of it. So that's great news. That gives us lots to talk about. Both, well, we could wait until this Friday and do it long form again or touch on it again all week. But Patrick Snyder keeps me well supplied with reasons to hate Facebook or other people's reasons that they've written up for hating Facebook, and they're all pretty good. So let's see what has been going on this morning on Twitter. I understand. I don't know exactly how it happened or why, but Glenn Youngkin, who is running for governor, ostensibly. I mean, he's doing things that make it seem like he's not, because he's terrible as a candidate. But he's running for governor here in Virginia. I'm sure that'll come up, because Greg likes to remind us about that. And I guess in an attempt to position himself impossibly somewhere between the lunatic right that he needs to court in order to bring out his base in the election and the rest of the state and the country, the rest of the Commonwealth and the country, who believe, you know, real things like Joe Biden won the election. I guess he's been asked, well, look, are you a wingnut or are you not a wingnut? You need to tell everybody where you stand. Who won the election in 2020? And he says, very sensibly, that Joe Biden won the election, which he did. So points there. But he was also asked, apparently, whether if he were a member of Congress, had he been a member of Congress on January 6th, how would he have voted on the question of whether or not to challenge the electoral votes of the several states that lunatic Republicans decided to challenge. And he said, oh, yeah, I totally would have done that, actually. I would have voted that way. And I guess he thought that he was clearing things up or making himself look better by saying, well, but Joe Biden won the election. I acknowledge that much. But it actually, of course, makes things much worse, as many people are pointing out this morning, for him to essentially declare, well, I personally believe that Joe Biden won the election. However, for the sake of, pleasing my lunatic right-wing base, I would have cast my sacred vote as a member of Congress in my oath to uphold the Constitution, etc., to throw that all overboard to satisfy the crazies. I would have voted in support of the challenge of the various states and their electoral votes. And that's quite, stupid. I just don't understand, how you could think that was going to help anything. But he's not a very smart guy and not a very principled guy. And all right, so update for those of you following the Virginia elections. The Republican candidate is terrible, and you shouldn't vote for him. Early voting has started here, by the way, in Virginia, and it started pretty early on, too. I think it might be already 10 days into early voting, and I should go already. And I've had no inclination so far to go. I don't intend, to wait for Election Day, and I'll probably be prompted by the fact that our college boy has got a break coming up, and we'll probably bring him to vote early during the break rather than have him deal with an absentee ballot later on, et cetera, and maybe at that point if I'm probably bringing him because I'm not driving himself, I might as well just go and vote while I go and do it. All right. Well, let's see. Other things that are happening. Oh, well, I'm reminded by Greg there's a pandemic on. As a matter of fact, something that landed in my Twitter feed and then therefore in Pocket today, the write-up by David Leonhardt in the New York Times on Red COVID. COVID's partisan pattern is growing more extreme, and that, of course, has been ably illustrated for us all along on Twitter and elsewhere by Charles, our friend Charles. Is it Gaba? I guess Greg will remind me about the proper pronunciation there. But, it's only 10 years we've been trying to remember this, and we see him every day on Twitter and online elsewhere. And we all, it's even been a couple of years since we, bothered with the old-timey handle of brain wrap with him. But, we're trying to do the, he's a, respectable kind of guy now. And then, you know how it is with online names. I don't know. I never pronounce it out loud. You see it all the time. You know exactly who I'm talking about. But there's no indication. We must have gotten the word at some point that it was Gaba and not Gaba, which is what it looks like, Gaba. But you know how it is with names around here. We care about such things, even though, it's like we don't do any exercises or drills to try and remember the thing. We simply remember that there was this time that we didn't remember, and then we're filled with doubt and dread and shame as well. Why not just throw that in there as well? All right, Greg Dworkin's here to help us organize things for the morning. He's already done that in a series of 19 behind-the-scenes Skype messages. We'll now decode for the rest of you. They come encrypted. That is to say, you can't see what they are, but I can. That's not really what encryption means, but it sounds a lot cooler. So, good morning, Greg. How you doing?
Good morning. Let me show you what David is looking at here on internet radio.
Radio. See, everybody sees it? Good.
Everybody see? I'm holding it up to the microphone. It's funny that you should mention pronunciation because, of course, I'm famous for mangling names, and yet I've been practicing trying to get the German pronunciation of the people who were running in the German election.
Mangling names.
Correct.
It's Mengele is what you're thinking.
Yeah, Mengele. It's Angela Mengele, and, I mangle everything.
Dr. Mengele is here to... All right.
Right? So Angela Merkel is not running.
No.
I'm going to start with that because I think it's important, and it's of 24 hours interest to the United States. It should be more, but it isn't, and I'm going to do it while it's hot. But they had an election yesterday. A lot of people showed up. A lot of people voted by mail. Nobody was questioning that.
Bulk of them German, I assume.
And the ruling party, which is a CDU, CSU, Union and why the different letters in different parties. There's no really good American analogy. Maybe the best closest one would be Minnesota.
Oh, okay.
There's a Democratic
DFL,
Farmer Labor Party,
right.
DFL.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right? So if you're running for, let's say, senator from Minnesota, you're going to be on the DFL ticket.
Right.
Okay.
I would.
And so, but it's just a state thing. It doesn't have any salience or even familiarity with the rest of the country. So if you have a Democratic Farmer Labor DFL senator from Minnesota and you say, well, what's your national party? They're going to say, well, I'm a Democrat, of course.
Right. I'm not an F or an L.
And nobody questions that.
Yeah.
So CSU is essentially a Bavarian party. They run at the state level. And slightly more conservative than the rest of the CDU, which is the national version, and that's Angela Merkel's party.
I see.
And so if CSU, CDU, it's essentially the same party.
CSU is Bavarian?
CSU is Bavarian. Okay. So when you see that combo and they use as their color black, okay, that's that particular party, the ruling party. If you want historical precedent, this is the party of Konrad Adenauer, if you recognize that name.
Sure.
Right?
I do.
And they did terribly. And interestingly, part of the reason they did terribly is Merkel was popular but is stepping down. They had some internal issues as to who was going to be the representative. And the person that won, Armin Laschet, slightly French-sounding name because I think he's of Belgian origin. Or the name is. He's German. And there was a huge, because of climate change, flood in his home state. And he really performed terribly as leader. And that hurt him. And a lot of people who drifted away from the ruling party felt they weren't doing enough, both locally and nationally, on the environment.
Okay.
So CDU lost votes, and those votes, went various and sundry places. But one of the places that it went is to the winner, by a very tiny margin, which is the Social Democrats. Which party's name is SPD, and their color is red.
SPD, red. Got it. All right.
Okay. And so this party, the SPD, has a premier candidate named Olaf Scholz.
Sure.
And he's the likely...
Knows nothing.
Yeah, it sounds like the guy from Hogan's Heroes.
Right.
There's no E at the end. It's not Schulze. It's Scholz. But he appears to be in the lead and has first crack at forming a coalition. Now, for those of you who have followed the show when we talk about Israeli politics, and we talk about coalition, you'll be familiar with the concept. Winning isn't enough. You then have to sit down and have a coalition enough to get a majority.
Right. Okay.
And so it's similar in that regard. And the winner by, who gets the most votes or who has the most seats gets to have the first crack at forming a new government.
Okay.
So the Red Party under Olaf Scholz wins there. And again, one of the huge things on the agenda for German voters was the environment after those big floods. But also, what's the state of play of the European Union, because Germany is the most important player, and what's the state of the United States with all our anti-democratic stuff and Trump things scaring the bejeebers out of them. So are they going to look inward, and are they going to try to make the European Union a stronger player as a counter, and how does that work? And so those are some of the things that have bedeviled and flummoxed German voters, as well as looking for change and moving, forward in the 21st century. All the social issues, have to be dealt with, and a conservative ruling party, Angela Merkel ran on the continuity and change. Continuity because continuity is good and it reassures voters, but change because we can't just stay in the 20th century and we have to deal with social issues and so on and so forth. So it's a very interesting time there. And the effects on the United States are going to be profound because, what happens in the European Union is going to matter.
Right.
So they're the Red Party. But since they don't have enough votes by themselves, they're going to have to be in coalition with somebody. And so there's the Greens, which is, oddly enough, green is their color.
That's a good choice. Good.
Right?
Good for them.
There's FDP, which is yellow. And so if the red SPD and Greens and FDP form a coalition, that's called the Traffic Light Coalition. Right?
Yeah.
And so there's other colors which may happen.
Pick a good color.
You could have a grand coalition, which is the ruling party and the SPD that just barely won. Mm-hmm. So that would be red-green. Or you could have the ruling party still be the one that made the coalition because they link with the Greens and FDP yellow. So then you'd have black, green, yellow. That's called the Jamaica Coalition because of the colors of the Jamaican flag.
It is.
Right?
Interesting.
Or you could have red and black and yellow.
Did they take note
and that would be CDU, SPD, and FDP, and that would be the German coalition because it's the German flag.
Yes.
So there's, and then you could have red, black, and green. That would be the Kenyan coalition because that's the Kenyan. So all of these things are possible, and only now, just like in Israel, do you have the work of coalition building. The minor parties have to talk to each other first, then they have to talk to the major party, so it'll be a while before we find out who's really the winner. But that's where things stand. It's awfully interesting, and it's important to us, and that's why I thought we should cover it, even if we don't cover it anymore.
Okay. I mean, that I would kind of vote for that maybe being it, but I like the whole twister thing where you try and put your left hand on one color and right hand on another and name it for a flag. That's cool.
Right. That's the Twister Coalition. So all of that, I think, is relevant. And as far as elections go, that's the German election. As far as the Virginia election, it's, Glenn Youngkin is in a bizarre position because he can't afford to split his Republican voters.
Right.
The base wants him to acknowledge Trump, and Trump told him, you have to be more Trumpy or you're not going to win because my voters will stay home. And the more moderate Republican voters, the country club Republicans, and there still are some in Virginia, really don't want to hear that. And so Axios interviewed Glenn Youngkin, and he wouldn't say whether he would have voted to certify the election on January 6th.
Oh.
He said Biden beat Donald Trump legitimately, and there's no room for violence in America, but he refused to say, I would not have voted to certify the election, or I would have voted to certify the election. McAuliffe is going to pound him on that. And I still think, even though it's a closer election than we'd like to see, and so no complacency here, I still think McAuliffe has a slight lead, but we'll know more because Monmouth is coming out with a Virginia poll later today. And so we'll have a much better sense of where things stand.
Okay.
Right now, in the pundit class inside the Beltway talk, they like to say Joe Biden isn't popular and his agenda is failing, and therefore Youngkin has a chance in Virginia. And that's pretty simplistic and not necessarily true. And that's why polling is so important, even though polls sometimes miss. I mean, just as an example, the final numbers in California just came out over the weekend, and they're essentially exactly the same as they were the last time Gavin Newsom ran and won. So Politico and others were pushing the story about how well Larry Elder did. And, Elder made a statement and this, that, and that. But, if you read the articles, it's like, well, he made a statement, but of course they only got a quarter of the vote. And that's the dilemma in California for Republicans. He may have dominated Republicans, but what good is that when they're only 25% of the vote?
That's, well, not much good, thankfully.
But that's, raises a bigger issue in terms of Donald Trump and where he stands. But I'm just saying that, the California election, until the California recall, until the election actually took place, was being held up as an example of how Democrats are in trouble in 2022. Oh. And now that Gavin Newsom won exactly the same margin as he did before, all of a sudden nobody's talking about what that means for 2022. Oh. It's only interesting if the Democrats are losing. But if actually the Democrats show strength, well, let's turn to a different topic because obviously everybody knows recalls are special and doesn't tell you anything.
Right, yes. Okay, I see why they turn away from that.
Right. So, and which in fact is true. Recalls don't really tell you anything, but it was a stupid line to begin with, just as it's a dumb line to say whatever's happening in Virginia has everything to do with Joe Biden. Actually, it has everything to do with what's going on in Virginia. So we'll see about that. Youngkin isn't that good a candidate, but
Clunkin, I like that.
Yeah, Clunkin. Yeah, Youngkin isn't that good a candidate, but there was a quote I saw on Twitter, which I actually put into the pundit roundup.
Let's see.
Which I at the very, very end, so I'm just scrolling to find it, which I thought was relevant about how people think about things. And the person who said it was, here we go, scroll, Adam Grant, and says, it isn't true that facts never change minds. They just don't change minds that are already made up. If you see your ideas as identities to defend, you twist and resist data to rationalize your views. If you treat ideas as hunches to test, then you embrace data to update your views. And most people are the former and not the latter. The latter are the scientists. The former is the general public. So if you give somebody information that their views, for example, on vaccination are wrong, you're not going to change their mind. Because they see it as an identity thing, and that's why they so fiercely resist the idea of changing their mind. Well, what's that got to do with Virginia? Well, if you're a Republican and your identity is wrapped up in being a conservative Republican, you don't really care whether Youngkin is a good candidate, bad candidate, or anything else. He's on your team, right? Yankees beat the Red Sox last night in late inning home runs, and if you're a Red Sox fan, you're not going to ever change to be a Yankees fan. You're just not. It's your identity.
Well, they won, so maybe I should go with them. Yeah, that doesn't happen.
That doesn't happen, right? So, and of course, about final standings in the season, but the Yankees passed the Red Sox for, a wild card slot with that win yesterday. And the tribal nature of the two teams in terms of how they look at each other and their fans, that's Republicans, Democrats. And so you're not going to get Republicans to change their mind about Youngkin. What you will do, and this is why it's so interesting that Donald Trump had that rally in Georgia over the weekend, lambasting Brian Kemp and saying Stacey Abrams would have been a better governor. Not that he believes that. But the point is not whether or not Stacey Abrams would in fact have been a better governor. The point is Brian Kemp wasn't sufficiently loyal, and Trump would rather destroy the Republican Party in Georgia than allow a non-100% Trumper to exist. And he's still mad at Georgia because they wouldn't follow his directions any more than Arizona would. More on that. And again, the point there is, so his supporters are going to hear that. And it's not that they're going to change their identity and therefore vote for Stacey Abrams should she run against Brian Kemp again.
Listen to this man.
It's that they might stay home. And that's, in fact, how Warnock and Ossoff won. And so, the issue for Youngkin isn't whether or not Terry McAuliffe can change anybody's mind about who to vote. It's more like, well, if Youngkin isn't sufficiently clear, then some of the Trumpers may stay home. And if he is sufficiently clear, then that may motivate Democrats to show up. And that's why he keeps trying to hedge it. And what drives me nuts about the press covering this, and DC Press does this all the time, well, he's cleverly and successfully trying not to get nailed down on where he stands on insurrection, and it just might work. And that's going to be true right up until election. And in fact, if it doesn't work, it's like the caravans with Ed Gillespie.
Oh, yes.
Right? What clever stuff he's doing, using the caravans to change that. Well, it didn't work.
Yeah.
Oh, well, obviously it was never going to work because, it's a relatively blue state. Well, you're always right. You just keep changing your column to make it so. And again, we'll know a little bit more with the Monmouth poll in terms of where things stand. If it turns out Youngkin has a 1-point lead, I'll say, okay, well, obviously that does matter. And maybe what he's doing is working. But I'm not convinced it's working, and I won't be convinced it's working until he wins the election. And if he didn't win the election, it didn't work.
I guess there's no avoiding.
I hate to be literal-minded about it, but, that's what you're trying to do, not impress columnists.
Right. True. All right, so there's only really one way to measure whether it works or not.
Well, there's two ways to measure polling, and then the actual only poll that counts.
Yes, right. The poll that counts is the one that answers, did your strategy work?
Right.
Okay.
So what's the background for all of that?
I don't know.
Still a lot going on about insurrection.
Damn it.
David Becker,
I knew it. Yes.
who is executive director of election innovation, a CBS News analyst, election law contributor, formerly DOJ civil rights, so he's got chops.
All right.
And had a nice thread this morning, seeing headlines like Democrats are racing to discredit the Arizona audit. That's not only inaccurate, it's unhelpful. It isn't a political story. It's about the health of American democracy. First, it wasn't an audit. It was a partisan effort to delegitimize democracy from the start. Arizona had laws requiring audits of its ballots, all paper, written by the Arizona Senate. Arizona election officials followed the laws and went beyond and was verified multiple times throughout the state with audit-certified labs confirming the machines worked and courts confirming the results, and that was all done months ago, all consistent with Arizona law.
Right.
The Senate in Arizona started this mess after the election, hiring a biased grifter firm from Florida with no experience in elections in a completely untransparent process where they withheld documents and kept press out. And this disaster destroyed the chain of custody, security of the ballots, and the election technology, likely violating the law and costing Arizona millions. Incredibly, the Arizona senators who authorized this attack on democracy were on the very ballots that they sought to delegitimize. Yeah. They sought to cast out on their own elections, their own authority, all in service to the election loser.
Right.
And this isn't a race. They didn't confirm anything. They didn't confirm Biden's win. They were incompetent from the beginning. They just couldn't manufacture enough evidence to fake fraud. The election was verified, regardless of what the loser says.
Yes.
So those are the facts. More on that after the break.
Okay. Plenty of morons to go around after the break. No doubt about it. Yeah, that was the big news at the end of the week, except we all knew how it was going to come out. We were just waiting to see what they were going to do with the bad news.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Air Roots Radio. We're still here. We're still collecting news. Found some during the break. What do we got? What's still left on the agenda, Ray?
Well, I was talking about David Becker's critique of the Arizona fraud audit, and I made the point this morning on Twitter that it's a perfect example of how the news media continues to both side stuff to everybody's detriment, treating the Arizona fraud grift as if it were somehow legitimate. And a great example this morning in the Washington Post, misinformation still threatens electoral process after Arizona ballot review. It wasn't a ballot review. It was a blatant partisan attempt to overthrow the results. It was a grift. Yes. You can call them those things and you'd be correct. The furthest thing it was a ballot review, which implies fairness and balance, and it's bullshit.
Yes, it appears to be. I mean,
and there's other, and that's why Becker started off by saying these headlines drive me crazy, and here's why I wrote this thread. Okay. But here's a perfect example of what he was talking about.
Yeah.
Okay. So why is it important? Well, let's get to some important articles. One of them, much discussed over the weekend, you've probably seen, is a Robert Kagan piece in the Washington Post. Our constitutional crisis is already here. The U.S. is heading into its greatest political and constitutional crisis since the Civil War, with a reasonable chance over the next 3 or 4 years of incidents of mass violence, breakdown of federal authority, and division of the country into warring red and blue enclaves. The warning signs may be obscured by the distractions of politics, the pandemic, the economy, and global crises, and by wishful thinking and denial. But about these things, there should be no doubt. First, Donald Trump will be the Republican candidate for president in 2024. The hope and expectation that he would fade in visibility and influence have been delusional. He enjoys mammoth leads in the polls, building a massive campaign war chest, and at this moment, the Democratic ticket looks vulnerable. Barring health problems, he's running. Second, Trump and his Republican allies are actively preparing to ensure his victory by whatever means necessary, and that's where the Arizona fraud comes in. Trump's charges of fraud in the 2020 election are now primarily aimed at establishing the predicate that challenge future election results that don't go his way. Some Republican candidates have already begun preparing to declare fraud in 2022, just as Larry Elder tried meekly to do in the California recall contest. By the way, separately, Jack Schaefer of Slate looked at this and said, yeah, but although that's true, there's a different interpretation, which is this is actually Trump weakness. You know, the reason that he's talking about coups and any means necessary is he simply doesn't have the votes and he doesn't have the support and he's losing support. And that's why he's talking more and more about any means necessary. Yeah. And the fact of the matter is the best way to get rid of him is to vote against him. And the more he does this by any means necessary, the more votes he turns off. Now, that's relevant to the Virginia election because Republicans have argued, don't worry about how Glenn Youngkin stands with Donald Trump. Donald Trump is old news. But he's not old news. He's current news. And that makes it important for Terry McAuliffe to tie Youngkin to Donald Trump.
Yes.
So
I would not mind trying.
This Kagan piece is very long, has a lot of interesting and good stuff here. And he also points out later on in the piece, most Americans and all but a handful of politicians, and remember what I was just talking about with the Washington Post, have refused to take this possibility seriously enough to try and prevent it. As has so often been the case in other countries where fascist leaders arise, their would-be opponents are paralyzed in confusion and amazement at this charismatic authoritarian. They followed the standard model of appeasement, which always begins with underestimation. And that's why the both sides stuff in the news guides drives me crazy. Okay? But again, the Kagan piece is so good and so long, I'll let you read it for yourself. And I'm going to do a critique of it by Dan Dresner, which appeared this morning. How scared should we be about 2024? A few thoughts on Kagan's latest. What he writes sounds pretty bad, and Kagan doesn't let up.
Okay.
He warns it would be foolish to imagine that the violence of January 6th was an aberration and won't be repeated, and Trump and his Republican allies are actively preparing to ensure his victory by whatever means necessary. And again, repeats the line about refuse to take the possibility seriously enough. Politico's Jack Schaefer, wasn't Slate, it was Politico, takes a slightly more jaundiced view. Schaefer offers up the only person or party that attempts a coup d'etat is the one that can't win. Gearing up for a coup, which we concede is correct, is not a sign of political strength, but one of political weakness. He's run twice, he's lost popular vote twice, and the wildness of last-ditch maneuver, whatever it turns out to be, will require much from us, but above all, it will oblige us to keep our cool and just vote. And Dresner says, well, the problem is those things are both true. Schaefer's correct to note that for most Americans, the one thing they need to do is vote against Trump and his toadies. But Kagan's not wrong. Both elected leaders and appointed officials need to start thinking now about what can be done to minimize the threats posed to the republic by the most dangerous former U.S. official since Aaron Burr. And, basically what that means is examining what's the procedure for contested elections and make sure it's crystal clear and tight so that it doesn't just get thrown to the House where the House decides by majority of states.
Yes. Another sop to the uninhabited rural areas.
Right. So, all of that I think is important. And I thought all of that was well worth highlighting.
I'll agree. And
that's good.
X gets the square.
Yeah. So speaking of agreeing, I have to throw in that there was yet another article in the New York Times by Deborah Tannen. You may remember her. She's the linguist who, for our sake, identified the concept of cooperative overlapping.
Yes.
Right? Beginning to talk while another is talking can be a way of showing enthusiastic engagement with what the speaker is saying.
Right.
And that's why I so enthusiastically interrupt David all the time.
Enthusiasm.
It's supportive.
That's right. Yeah.
See how it worked just there?
Right there.
He said yes, and I said, yeah, exactly.
It's true, and I don't know what else to say about that. It's all
It's
right.
a New York, New Jersey thing.
But she's
you
got
do it all the time.
Yeah, and she's back with more. Is that what's happening? She's interrupting herself with.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. What's happening?
So because it still happens that people object to it. Well, I say over your objection.
Yeah.
Well, what the hell is supposed to do, you moron?
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Exactly. How are we going to fill 2 hours if we can't do that?
Right. Well, then you got my other quote you can always play too, because that's relevant. And that has to do
true.
with the pandemic.
Comes at the end usually, but if you're up for it,
right. Well, do it now. Oh my fucking God, get the fucking vaccine already, you fucking fucks.
There you go.
Right. So David Leonard has a piece about that.
Oh,
which
yes,
I think you mentioned, right?
Right. Yes. Okay.
Right. It's called Red COVID. COVID's partisan pattern is growing more extreme. And the Charles gave a contribution, of course. But there was something in it that I picked out. And he had this little section called Promising Ideas. And I went off on a tangent about that over the weekend and, pointed it out this morning. And in Promising Ideas, he says, how might more conservative Americans be persuaded to get vaccinated, having already accepted the premise that red states and red counties are unvaccinated relative to blue states and blue counties.
Right.
So how might more conservative Americans be persuaded to get vaccinated? One intriguing anecdote involves the football team at the University of Mississippi, which is entirely vaccinated, even though the state is one of the nation's lowest vaccination rates. Coaches there emphasize the tangible short-term costs of getting COVID rather than the more remote chance of death. The players might have to miss a game, and the team might have to forfeit it.
Right.
Very straightforward. That's why you should do it.
That is true. Or, even if you don't miss a game, you miss X number of workouts, you're sick.
Right. Conservative Timothy Carney wrote in the Washington Examiner, if Carney had refused to get vaccinated, he explained, he would have risked loading more work onto his wife, his colleagues, and his partner in teaching Sunday school, as well as forced his children to miss school. So the point I'm making and the tangent I'm making is that at great length and sometimes vehemently, some of the public health people and experts have argued against boosters for Americans. You know this and where this is going. If you listen to the show, and David is forced to listen to my part of it, that public health people are focused on hospitalizations and death. Americans are focused on not getting sick in the first place.
Yeah.
They're different functions. Americans, individuals should focus on whether or not they get sick. Let the public health people worry about the hospitalizations. And the public health people should be focused on the hospitalizations and let the public focus on their own personal responsibility. But the problem there is if the public health people only message about hospitalization and death, they're going to come to the conclusion, well, of course you shouldn't get a booster because you don't need one, because the boosters only slightly enhance the concept that the vaccines are already keeping you out of the hospital. Yes. But that's not what made the University of Mississippi football team get vaccinated.
Right.
The public is worried about getting infected. And so public health has to be very clear about two things that they are just missing. They're missing an action on in terms of messaging. One is, so is getting a booster going to help you not get infected? Assuming you do other things like stay masked if your area prevalence and spread is high, and do the social distancing thing and the non-pharmaceutical interventions as well. But will getting a booster vaccine help the 34-year-old single mother grocery store worker in Tennessee, which is a high virus area, as you have pointed out?
Yes.
Will it help her? And if so, why shouldn't she get it? And they're not dealing with that because they're saying, well, but the real point is to keep you out of the hospital. Well, that's not the real point to her, because most normal people don't think about the hospital. They say, you know what? I've read so many stories. It seems to me the people in the hospital are the I wish I had chosen differently people. Mm-hmm. And that's not me. I got vaccinated. So I'm not interested in what you say about the hospital. I want to know whether or not I'm going to get it, because if I get it, I got to miss work. And what does that mean for my kids going to school and so on and so forth? That's what they care about.
Yeah.
So the messaging about whether or not boosters help or don't help that is missing. It's just going, there's nothing there. There's a hole. It's a black hole. And that has to be addressed by public health because that's what the public cares about. That's number one. And number two, what about people who have already been infected? So they've had COVID. Now they have some natural immunity. That's a bad way to treat the virus, as we all know, because it leads to, 680,000 deaths.
Yeah.
But it happened. You lived in New York, you got infected before vaccines were available. Where do you stand in regard to needing a booster? Do you need one or do you not need one? Black hole,
need one.
silence, radio silence. Nobody's discussing this at the public health agency level for the public. They may be discussing it amongst themselves, and they're probably saying, well, we don't really have enough data to say anything. And the public's saying, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Say something. And if you don't say something and I can get the booster, I'm getting it. Yeah. And if you don't understand that, you shouldn't be in the job of telling people what to do.
Probably true. Yeah.
So, that was my rant on that. And, I love and respect the people who are trying to make public health policy, trying to explain that hospitalizations are the most important thing. At a systems level, it is, but you're not very good at messaging and you're missing what's going on here. And you sound like you're in an ivory tower, and that's not what the public wants to hear.
Yeah, right. Well, there should be, I don't know how they can get themselves to agree on it, but
you don't have to agree, but address it. The other stuff is addressed.
Right,
I get what vaccines boosters may or may not do for increasing your risk or decreasing your risk of hospitalization or keeping it the same. I get that because you've said that.
Yep.
Tell us about the other stuff.
Okay. I think they should. And it would. It probably would help. I love the idea of changing the focus to. There was a great anecdote about the football team, and building on that, to say, look, you want to stay clear of all of it, and that's a great sales point. And I don't know. I'm not certain why they. I guess because they haven't made up their mind about whether or not they feel guilty about not having vaccinated the rest of the world yet, or what. But
well, that's part of it. I mean, they outright say the focus needs to be on getting the people who haven't been vaccinated their first dose, not boosters. And they take upon themselves. Okay, this is where they step out of their lane and start going beyond what their expertise is. Your expertise is evaluating the studies to tell us what benefit you get from the booster. They then step out of that and say, and we don't want to say anything else because that would discourage people from getting vaccinated in the first place.
I could see this.
Okay, well, how do you know? And what makes you think you're right about that? And who have you asked? And do you have messaging people at the table to discuss this with you? Do you do polling? How do you know that if you discuss boosters, you'll discourage somebody else from getting vaccinated? Their focus is different than yours. You don't even know that. How do you know the rest of it?
You probably don't.
Well, you probably don't. And, again, I've worked with CDC. It was a decade ago. I don't think they're that different. I love them, but let's just say they're not very nimble.
Okay.
They've decided that this is the message, and, the fact that the virus is relatively rapidly moving and public opinion is rapidly moving, they don't keep up, and they're not expert on this. And, they really need to get some input from outside.
Yep. Okay. Well, I'm for giving them that info. I really did like that. That's a great insight to me all of a sudden. Oh, yeah, there's a different way of selling this thing entirely. And it seems to me like that moves naturally into, if there's such a big market for it with its different message, well, then that should open your eyes about the necessity or the interest that you ought to have in selling.
But here's another point. I was having this discussion with somebody online.
Yeah.
I think that if you've been previously infected with COVID, you should probably get a vaccine, at least one dose.
Yeah.
And that's your booster. And the combo of being previously infected plus the vaccine, even if you get both doses, as recommended, it gives you the best protection.
Sounds like that. I mean, you've mentioned that that's a at least a possibility, if not a proven fact.
So people will say, well, why do I have to get the vaccine, which I don't want because of my tribal nature?
Well, did you want the virus?
If I've been previously infected.
I don't know.
No, if you haven't been infected, go ahead and get the vaccine. Fine. But what about us people who have been previously infected? Now you're mandating it, and I'm going to lose my job over it, and I'm pissed.
Well, you're going to lose your job.
I don't need
over
it. I've already been infected. Why do I have to lose my job over it? The data clearly says that previous infection gives you some degree of protection. Why isn't that good enough? It's good enough for Iceland and Europe. Well, if you want to fly there, all you have to do is show you either have been vaccinated or you have previous infection.
Go there.
You know, why do I have to, you know, and rather than saying, well, you're a moron and you're obviously, you know, that is a legitimate point of view, which may or may not be correct, but isn't being addressed by the CDC, the FDA, and NIH, and Tony Fauci, and all that other stuff.
I don't know.
And there's lots of people out there who look at that and say, look, I still have this question. You're not addressing it. I'm not stupid, and I can't trust you because you won't even talk to me.
I don't know why. I don't know how hard is that. You say, well, it's better if you get the vaccine.
Yeah, exactly. It's worth, you know, addressing. So again, my 2 points here
how could this
are
not
that,
be happening?
you know, the benefit of boosters to not getting infected has to be addressed. And if you have a good reason that that's not a good enough reason to get a booster, say so. And the benefit of getting a vaccine in the first place after you've been previously infected has to be addressed. And if there are practical reasons why that doesn't make sense, how do you know you actually had the infection? What testing is sufficient? We don't have the resources to test everybody. The antibodies don't tell you what you think they do after you get an antibody test, or they're the right antibodies, and so on and so forth. You know, so there may be practical reasons for why that shouldn't, but address it. Don't just leave it blank, leave it in a vacuum, leave it in a black hole. Then the public, you know, gets their own views about it. Okay, well, you know, I can't trust you because you don't even address my concerns.
It's kind of bizarre. I mean, I don't know. The door's open for that engagement, right? It seems like an easy thing, and I think it would be easy enough to grasp. But why should I get a booster if I've already had COVID? I have, you know, I've got you know, some level of immunity. All right. Well, let me measure what kind of level of immunity you have. Hey, you've got X level of immunity. Now, if you had also gotten the vaccine,
I think if there was a simple way to do that,
Y.
great. It turns out there isn't.
Oh,
you know,
well, no
so
wonder.
that's part of the problem. But say so.
Yeah, I guess. But yeah, I don't know. Also, I mean, here's a news story about a person who had it 3 times. So what do you want me to tell you?
But did they? How do you know? Did you see their medical record? They
I
said they
seen
did,
it
but how do
in
they
the
know?
newspaper.
I felt like I did. You had 3 rapid tests? I mean, were you testing with a PCR that picks up previous infection? You know,
yes, I was.
Not enough information here to really make a judgment on that.
Well, that's less convincing, as people will say. I don't know, I either had it or I didn't. Yeah, well, how do you know? Because I know. All right. Well,
Yeah, you know,
this
I'm
one
reminded of John Cleese, you know, in Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Well, she turned me into a newt. That's how I know she's a witch.
Yeah.
Oh, you don't look like a newt now. Well, I got better.
Right. So, all right. Well, that's imperfect, I suppose. Yeah.
Well,
all right. Well, they got
how
some
do you
more
know the anecdote is true? How do you know? So, you know, again, the Atlantic piece by Catherine Wu, sorry, a coronavirus infection might not be enough to protect you. Anybody who'd rather have COVID than get vaccinated is taking 2 gambles. Immunity will stick around and that symptom won't. But that's not addressing the issue. But I already had it, not my choice, but I did. Now what do I do?
Right. The idea of, well, I had it and it was my choice. Or, you know, if I just get the disease, then I'll be immune.
People had a COVID party. People went to it, and half the party wound up in the ICU.
Yeah, that's also not so good. And, yeah, as you point out, right, you know, for people who say getting the disease is as good as a vaccine in terms of preventing future infection, you say, yes, but the record of the disease is 700,000 more deaths than the vaccine. Like, that's a bad trial. Like, if the disease was a vaccine and you were the CDC, would you say it was a safe vaccine?
Right.
You wouldn't.
Well, so Catherine Wu points out those who surface from encounters with the virus seemingly unscathed might not have much immunity to show for it either. Several studies have shown that a decent percentage of infected people might not produce detectable levels of antibodies for the simple reason not all infections are the same.
Okay.
One person has a cold and goes to work. Another person has a cold and is laid up for 2 days because they feel awful.
Right.
Same with the
that
flu.
was me. I did that.
Beatrice Hahn, a virologist at the University of Pennsylvania, told me the immune system tends to use its own threat assessment to calibrate its memory, dismissing many brief or low-symptom encounters. This could be a special concern for people with long COVID, many of whose initial infections were asymptomatic or mild.
Oh, I didn't even really realize that was the case.
At the other end of the spectrum, very severe disease can traumatize the immune system so it fails to recollect the threat it's fighting. Researchers have watched immune cell training centers completely collapse beneath the blaze of inflammation. And Ein-Hung Lee, an immunologist at Emory University, told me in some cases the virus might find its prior host nearly as unguarded as before. So it would be dangerous to assume good immunity across all individuals in this group. And if that's the case, and you have to make policy, it's better to advise everybody to get a vaccine than to say, okay, there might be some people who don't need it, but we really don't know who you are.
So it's not chicken pox. Doesn't work the way we
doesn't work the
think.
same way. Correct.
Okay. All right. You get it. You could get it again. Could be terrible. Could be worse. Could be better.
Right. Anyway, so those are the things I was highlighting. I suppose I could play, I just have to mention for the sake of completeness that the Democrats tonight are caucusing about how they're going to vote on the bilateral infrastructure framework on Thursday, even though it was a drop-dead deadline that it should have been done today.
Right. Because
Pelosi has enough sway in her caucus to convince the moderates that it's okay to wait a few days. And waiting a few days may help bring the progressives on board. And Pelosi has famously said it's not going to the floor unless it has the votes. The interesting thing is it may have the votes from Republicans because there's at least 8 to 10 Republicans who may vote for it.
Maybe.
So it's unclear exactly how all of this progresses. Yeah, we have shutdown to worry about on Thursday as well. But these are all moving parts, and sometimes deadlines focus the mind. And so I'm not playing the parlor game of this one's upset and that one's upset. And last week they said this. I don't really care. I just want to know whether it passed or not and how many votes it got. And even less concerned about how many votes it got than whether or not it passed.
Yes, right.
Right. So I'll leave that for Wednesday because I think we'll have more to say about that. Or maybe you want to say more about it over the next hour. But in the moment or two I have left before the end of this segment, I wanted to read to you something from Fierce Healthcare, a for-profit newsletter, which covers the healthcare field. And the question here is, how many employees have hospitals lost to vaccine mandates?
Okay.
And it does a nice review of here are the numbers so far. I don't remember if I gave it to you, but there it is. Okay.
Yeah.
As a practical matter, the policy may result in exacerbating the severe workforce shortage problems that currently exist, American Hospital Association President and CEO Rick Pollack said in a September 9th statement. And they were worried about it at a 25-bed rural hospital in Arkansas. Says they would not require it. He stressed staffing issues. And some industry figures have pushed back on staffing fears. So here's some numbers that they collected. Houston Methodist, first to announce a vaccine mandate. That's in Texas, which is, certainly famous for having a resistant governor. Mm-hmm. Houston Methodist, the first who got sick and, went all out with science when he was sick. But, the rest of you just have to take it on the chin because, personal choice and freedom. Right. Houston Methodist, the first to announce a vaccine mandate, said it had 153 resignations among its roughly 26,000 person workforce.
Yes.
Indiana University, 125 of its 35,800 employees resign.
Okay.
We talked on the show, much smaller, upstate New York. Stefanak, at least Stefanak's area, Lewis County Health System has seen 30 resignations. 165 of the provider's unvaccinated staff hasn't yet indicated where they're at. They employ 650 people. Right. And today's the day the mandate goes in because New York is doing it statewide. Maine Health, 58 out of its team of 23,000 have resigned.
All right, see you later.
Med Center Health, 180 employees fired, 3,800 employees overall. Medical University of South Carolina, 5 employees out of 17,000.
Okay.
And you get the idea here.
Yes.
There's another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 regional places that they highlight. Olean General Hospital, 11 resignations ahead of New York September 27th deadline. 250 of its 840 employees have not been vaccinated, but only 11 resignations. 23 staff fired by St. Clair Regional Medical Center, and they said it's less than 1% of the total workforce. And again, these are not necessarily nurses. These are often orderlies and support staff.
Yes, true, right.
UNC Health, 60 of its roughly 30,000 workers. So a very tiny fraction of the healthcare workforce is resigning over mandates. The rest of them are getting vaccinated. And the other point to make, of course, is that if you, let's say, are an orderly, or if you are a transporter, and you work in an area like at least Stefanek's district, the Lewis Health Center stuff,
Yes.
you're going to reflect the views of your district. If you work in a conservative area, you're going to reflect conservative viewpoint, likely. Just because you work in healthcare at a relatively low-paid job, low-tier job, doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to agree with everything Zeke Emanuel says.
That's true.
So, it's a product of your community. And I'm looking at these mandates and thinking they're working, and the systems can cope with the small number of people who leave. And mandates are doing what they're supposed to, which is to protect the hospital and the people who are patients there. It's not to provide succor and relief for the small number of people who want to get on the nightly news with a protest march.
Yeah. Well, right. So we're not that concerned about it. The numbers are pretty small, as you point out here. And in some cases, they're small enough that they might basically be no bigger than you might expect to lose to the disease itself if no one were vaccinated. So I don't know. In the end, it might be a wash.
And the other thing to consider with these numbers, what you don't know, how many of these are full-time people, how many of these are part-time people, and how many of these are called pro rata workers. PRN, as needed.
Oh.
Traveling nurses.
Yeah.
So you can't, even with these numbers, it's probably smaller than that in terms of the full-timers.
That could be true. Right. Now, I'm not going to answer the phones at this desk anymore. All right.
Well, somebody else.
Somebody else, I guess. Yeah. Not always a brain surgeon necessarily leaving here. Probably almost never.
Anyway,
right.
That's the story for today. I'll be
Cool.
back on Wednesday.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. All right, well, I learned during the prior segment from, let's see, I'll have to look all the way back here, our friend from Tennessee, who we only pronounce aloud every so often, Litz, Litzz, Litz 11, who I always think of as Liz for some reason because I leave the T out when I'm thinking about it. But who points out for us that it's confirmed, I guess. Who confirms it? Gizmodo? They're back? Okay. Well, it's confirmed by Gizmodo, which I guess we now confirm is also back and still publishing, that cartoonist Ben Garrison, Mr. Garrison has COVID. So, why is that of interest? Because, of course, he's an anti-vax, conservative, weirdo cartoonist. He's always been kind of like what are you talking about? You're a very dumb guy, quite honestly. The cartoons are dumb, but I mean, cartoons are always a little bit goofy. Let's see. The featured cartoon for illustrating the story of his COVID infection is it dated? This cartoon, usually they write the dates in here somewhere, right? Not certain what the date is, but a recent cartoon is of a horse labeled ivermectin shouting, "Get some horse sense," and rearing up and kicking with its back feet, kicking a Dr. Fauci figure who is holding on to what looks to be a collapsing or melting hypodermic needle filled with dollar signs as the medical industrial complex. There is one drop of the vaccine dripping out of the end of the crumpling needle, which looks to be sort of a death's head skull. The horse kicking him with horseshoes shaped like the old cents signs, like dollars versus cents, right? And so ivermectin, so much cheaper. Get some horse sense, you stupid scientist who's trying to vaccinate people. Well, duh. And it's captioned, a recent cartoon by Ben Garrison suggesting ivermectin is an effective treatment for COVID-19. It's not. And it is funny that he threw in there that ivermectin is represented as a horse, which is kind of a straight up admission of, yeah, it's a horse medicine, and I'm taking the horse medicine. After all the excuses the right-wingers tried to come up with, like, no, there's a human formulation for ivermectin you're all ignoring, et cetera, et cetera. Well, anyway, that's the headline. Anti-vaccine cartoonist Ben Garrison says he's got COVID-19, comma, won't go to hospital. Fine by me. Fantastic. Don't take up a hospital bed. I don't believe you, and I don't know that it's going to be your choice all the way through, and I have a feeling that if things turn bad, you're going to get scared and go to the hospital, and whatever. But the pro-Trump cartoonist says he's lost about 15 pounds, so he considers it a diet, and is taking ivermectin, which might be good for weight loss. Like, you might eat it and then say, oh my God, and then the idea of taking horse medicine makes you vomit, I suppose. It's not healthy for you. Neither is vomiting. But probably healthier than actually ingesting the stuff and leaving it there. Ben Garrison, a right-wing cartoonist known for his opposition to vaccines and his extremely flattering drawings of President Donald Trump. Oh, I don't think I even knew about that. But there's a link. Yeah. Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. Whenever he illustrates Trump, he makes him very muscular and Superman-ish looking. So that's kind of weird too. So I think he's been ill for a long time. Now he's also got COVID. Well, anyway, he told Gizmodo late Sunday that he contracted COVID-19, allegedly, and has been sick for about 2 weeks, but allegedly getting COVID hasn't changed. They used the word allegedly in this sentence. Allegedly getting COVID hasn't changed Garrison's mind about modern medical science. And as you know, he is a cartoonist, so you got to take his word for it when it comes to science. Garrison, who lives in Montana, currently, don't know what's going to happen to him in Montana, but for the moment, he's alive and in Montana. He believes that he got COVID-19 while dining out at a restaurant a couple of weeks ago, so don't do that. Montana has seen a disturbing rise in coronavirus cases in recent weeks, with about 900 new cases each day. And there aren't that many people in Montana. So, yes, it's definitely COVID, and we've had all the symptoms. My wife and I went out with a couple to a restaurant, and the next day all four of us were sick. One of us went to see a doctor and was told she has COVID, and that was the clincher. Now, the clincher, of course, would be getting tested and finding out that you yourself have COVID. I was with someone who has COVID. That's confirmed, and I'm sick also. You should get a test and see what you've got. You were probably right, but, especially if you're going to lecture us about the science. I know science better than these alleged scientists. Eat the ivermectin. I have COVID. How do you know I have COVID? Because I was near someone who had COVID. Well, you likely have COVID, but have you tried the test? No, and I won't either. All right, whatever. Let's see. So Garrison told all this to Gizmodo via email. Why via email? Because Garrison has been banned from Twitter for supporting the insurrection on January 6th, just in case you were wondering. And in case you thought he wasn't dumb enough for supporting the insurrection or for drawing Donald Trump as a muscular Superman. We're taking ivermectin and various vitamins and a lot of zinc, Garrison continued, explaining what he's doing to treat the disease. What he's doing because he has the disease. I don't know. What he's doing to treat the disease is nothing. The cartoonist also notes that he's taking beetroot juice, which, is probably okay to drink. I don't know if it helps you with this thing. None of this has been proven to treat or prevent COVID-19, with monoclonal antibodies and vaccines being the only real ways to fight this pandemic, which is still raging in many parts of the world, like Montana and the restaurant that this a-hole went to. Garrison has promoted ivermectin in his various cartoons, including the illustration above, where a horse is seen kicking Dr. Anthony Fauci, the nation's top infectious disease expert. The cartoon horse appears to have a sense symbol. I've told you all this. As he shouts, "Get some horse sense." Horses don't even talk. That's science. I just thought I would add that. And the horse kicks Fauci, and there's the dollar signs and the da-da-da-da-da. Ivermectin has not been shown to help treat COVID-19. Just want to say that again. While ivermectin is being studied as a potential COVID-19 treatment, they really are. I mean, they're studying it, maybe just to shut people up. Much of that research is plagued with alleged fraud, errors, oversight, and bad data. Those are all bad things for scientific research. In proper doses, the drug is relatively safe and a useful antiparasitic. Its popular use is for treating parasites in livestock, such as horses. Recently, some people, particularly those influenced by Facebook misinformation hubs, have taken the livestock versions of the drug in a mistaken belief that it can cure or prevent COVID-19, which it can't, leading to ivermectin's association with horses. Garrison is clearly referencing this with his recent cartoon. With 1,440 cases this year so far, ivermectin poisoning has more than tripled since 2019 and 20. According to the American Association of Poison Control Centers, the New York Times reported Sunday that in New Mexico, 2 people have died, their deaths being attributed to the use of ivermectin instead of proven COVID-19 treatments. State health officials say that ivermectin caused kidney failure in one of the patients. Garrison told Gizmodo that he and his wife are not feeling well, and their kidneys hurt, probably, and that he's completely lost his sense of taste and smell. Fine. Garrison seems to believe that he and his wife are struggling to overcome the disease because they're in their mid-60s. Both Tina and I feel slightly better after 2 weeks, but it has been rough. I lost my taste and smell as well as desire to eat any kind of food. I've lost, but not horse food. That I've been eating a copious amount of oats and hay for some reason. I lost 15 pounds as a result. Young people tend to bounce back more quickly, but we're in our mid-60s, Garrison wrote. So you could start engraving the headstones now. All right, when Gizmodo asked Garrison whether he'd been vaccinated against COVID-19, he repeated many of the same conspiracy theories that appear in his cartoons. The answer would have been no, but he wanted to do this. Instead, we'll never take their foul spike protein producing jabs, which are neither safe nor effective. They're not real vaccines. They're gene therapy. Garrison wrote in an email to Gizmodo. They're not. The various COVID-19 vaccines have been approved. Okay, you know about that. This is interesting. 15,000 have died as a result of the COVID vaccines, which, even if it were true, would be several 100,000 less just in the United States alone than have died from the natural immunity trials. But okay. 15,000, he claims, have died as a result of the COVID vaccines. Where does that come from? I don't know. And hundreds of thousands of others have had serious side effects. Mainstream media will not mention a word of this, not one peep. Instead, we get the safe and effective malarkey over and over, as well as government pushers urging us to take the free poison. Don't do it. The Pfizer CEO certainly won't. He did. Bill Gates and his family won't either. They have. Garrison claimed. Severe side effects to the I just saw that too. Or was I looking? I can't remember. I had maybe another page open. Maybe it's even up at the top of the Gizmodo page. But I had another page open that, was promoting an article. Maybe I saw it on Twitter. Promoting an article specifically about that, about Bill Gates and his daughter both having gotten, and I guess probably his wife too. I don't know why they singled out the daughter. Both got the vaccine, so whatever. But there is a cartoonist, so whatever the hell. Whatever we feel like saying. Severe side effects, do I want to read the rest of this? Severe side effects of the COVID-19 vaccine, such as death, that's a severe side effect, are extremely rare, and any American is more likely to die from COVID-19 than the vaccines. Garrison's contention that the CEO of Pfizer won't get vaccinated is simply untrue. Bill Gates has also been vaccinated against COVID-19, despite conspiracy theorists claiming he won't get the jab over fears of side effects. Garrison says he'd never visit a hospital to treat his COVID-19. I hope not. I hope it goes straight to the ground for him. Last week, NBC News reported that anti-vaccine Facebook groups have been influencing members not to seek hospital treatment. I applaud that, for them anyway. For COVID-19, even instructed them to pull their sick family members out of the ICU. I've seen a lot of that. People now are circulating how-to guides in exfiltrating people who are already hospitalized to get them out of there and give them some of the good ivermectin so that they die on their hands and have to report that. People are going to end up charged with manslaughter. I would never go to a hospital with COVID. Robert David Steele did it a few weeks ago, and they killed him. I don't know who that is, but fine. The hospitals get extra money for COVID death reports, which is necessary to keep fear ramped up, Garrison claimed in an email to Gizmodo. Why do they even bother? The man he's referencing, Robert David Steele, was a conspiracy theorist who frequently appeared on InfoWars with Alex Jones. Oh, is he dead? That's terrific. The 69-year-old Steele believed, that's past tense. Oh, well, he says they killed him. Should I believe him, though? He's an idiot. All right, well, anyway. 69-year-old Steele believes some incredibly bizarre things, including that NASA had imprisoned children on Mars to work as slaves. I would take advice from that guy. Where's your son? Slave on Mars. Steele, who claimed to be a former CIA officer, can you imagine if that were really true, reportedly died of COVID-19 in August. Hooray. Garrison insists that the entire COVID-19 pandemic response is really about government control, not public health, a recurring mantra in the COVID hoaxer community. He repeated his false claim that vaccines don't prevent COVID-19 ad nauseum. This is about vaccine passports, tracking, government control, and tyranny, Garrison added. The U.S. is currently averaging over 119,000 new cases each day and over 2,000 new deaths, and with only 55.9% of the population fully vaccinated, the disease is likely to keep circulating through the population during the winter, and may it rid us of Ben Garrison and all his progeny. Thank you very much. All right, well, that was rotten and totally uncalled for, but I'm sick and tired of these people. And, if they're begging for death by COVID, what can I tell you? Let's grant it, and grant it quick. Okay? All right. Let's see. What did I want to add to... Oh, you know what? Something we started on Friday, I think. Towards the end of the week, we discussed this thing. The hack of Epic, EPIK, the hosting service for right-wing lunatics and Nazis, right? And we found out that huge swaths of their information was stolen, and people are going to start using it to identify the operators of some of the worst right-wing trash on the internet, which is great. And I guess it's already started happening. So maybe first report of results on this, I thought I would jump to this rather than jump back to the second half of that Epic article from last time. Fallout begins for far-right trolls who trusted Epic to keep their identities secret. The colossal hack of Epic, an internet services company popular with the far right, has been called the mother of all data loads for extremism researchers. Some of those named in the data have already lost their jobs. Hooray. That's the Washington Post's title. Drew Hamill, Hannah Allam, Jeremy Merrill, and Craig Timberg all get credit on this byline. In the real world, Joshua Alayon, A-L-A-Y-O-N. I don't know how foreign sounding he pronounces it. Alayon or Alayon. Worked as a real estate agent, maybe you know him, in Pompano Beach, Florida, where he used the handle South Florida's favorite realtor to urge buyers on Facebook to move to, quote, the most beautiful state. The most beautiful state being, I would say, death by COVID. But in this case, he means Florida. But online, data revealed by the massive hack of Epic, an internet services company popular with the far right, signaled a darker side. Alion's name and personal details were found on invoices, suggesting he had once paid for websites with names such as racismincorporated.com, that could be anything, whitesencyclopedia.com, Bob White has written an encyclopedia, what's the problem with that, and christiansagainst.israel.com. Well, lots of Christians are against, maybe he's simply trying to reveal the problems of Christians who are against Israel, and the Holocaust is fake.com. Well, okay, they've made their case on that one. They were building towards more certainty. Good writing decision there. The information was included among hundreds of thousands of transactions published this month by the hacking group Anonymous that exposed previously obscure details of far-right sites and launched a race among extremism researchers to identify the hidden promoters of online hate. It's a very big race among extremism researchers. It's the master race of extremism research. After Alion's name appeared in the breached data, his brokerage, Travers Mirren Realty, dropped him as an agent. So if you're in the middle of a transaction with Travers Mirren Realty and you're worried about it, I guess you're all good now, unless they have more Nazis there. Anyway, that first reported, by the way, by real estate news site Inman. The brokerage's owner, Rick Rapp, that's a real name, told the Washington Post that he didn't, quote, want to be involved with anyone with thoughts or motives like that. Sounds good. Alion and the Post are told the Post that he does not own the Racism Inc. Site, Holocaust denial, or other web addresses, but declined to say if he had owned them in the past. The records were hacked earlier this year, but in a screenshot of his Epic account, which he sent to the Post, the information for 4 other domains he currently owns matches the private records that can be found in the Epic breach. So that's too bad for him. Asked why his name, address, email address, and other personal information were listed in company invoices for the Racism Inc. and Holocaust Denial domains, Alion said the data was easily falsifiable and he was the possible victim of extortion, you see, and that the Post was, quote, fake news. No one was actually asking for any money, but whatever. The breach of Epic's internal records has cast the spotlight on a long-hidden corner of the Internet's underworld, and researchers expect it could take months before they can process the full cache, the equivalent of tens of millions of pages. Many are digging for information on who owns and administers extremist domains about which little was previously known. Epic, based outside of Seattle, said in a data breach notice filed with the Maine's Attorney General, yes, this week, that 110,000 people had been affected nationwide by having their financial account and credit card numbers, passwords, and security codes exposed. An earlier data breach letter from the company, filed to comply with Montana law, they got a lot to do, was signed by the Epic security team, and they misspelled the company's name with a C in that one. An Epic spokesperson said it was a simple typo. Heidi Beirich, Beirich, a veteran researcher of hate and extremism, said she is used to spending weeks or months doing the detective work trying to decipher who is behind a single extremist domain. The Epic data set, she said, is like somebody has just handed you all the detective work, the names, the people behind the accounts. This is like the mother of all data loads because Epic was at the center of so many of the extremist websites and organizations that people like me study. Epic was the place of last refuge for a lot of these sites, said Beirich, co-founder of the nonprofit Global Project Against Hate and Extremism. And as the data is analyzed and looked at more deeply, we're going to see this ecosystem in a way that was simply not possible before. Beirich said the identities of administrators and web developers and the money flow, how sites stay afloat, are the kinds of details that for years have challenged even the most veteran hate trackers. The Epic hack might help connect the dots, she added. Epic's founder, you'll remember the improbably named Robert Monster, who did not respond to requests for comment and said the company's data was hijacked and urged people not to use it with negative intent. An Epic spokesperson said in emailed statements to the Post this week that the company, last week, had handled hundreds of thousands of domains over the years, and some are bound to be offensive. The company declined to attribute the statement to a named spokesperson. The Epic spokesperson called the hack an egregious violation against our users and said the breach data included up to 38,000 credit card numbers. The spokesperson said the company offers its services to everyone and that domains affiliated with right-wing politics comprise less than 1% of users. Epic said it's not aware of its users' intents and does not consider its role to be censors of free citizens. Our long-held policy of content neutrality has made our platform appealing to some in an increasingly polarized landscape, the spokesperson said. We do not endorse or condone any one particular ideology, and we feel uncomfortable with calls to censor those who use our services. Well, just 1% of them, don't worry about it. Though domain registrars such as Epic encourage customers to use accurate information when buying a new website address, it is fairly easy to register a domain in somebody else's name, and many registrars don't demand independent proof or confirmation of identity. Buyers wanting privacy commonly ask their registrars to conceal their information, including, in Epic's case, through an add-on service called Anonymize. Some basic details about a website domain's owner are publicly available in what's known as a whois, directory database. I imagine it's what it's spelled like, but there's no space. And it's not something weird like whois, right? Anyway, but the Epic breach revealed far more than that information. Materials from the hack reviewed by the Post include not just names and home addresses, but also full credit card numbers. We said that already. Unencrypted passwords and other highly sensitive data. Many website owners who trusted Epic to keep their identities hidden were exposed, but some who took additional precautions, such as paying in Bitcoin and using fake names, remain anonymous. The Post publicizes material obtained through hacking with caution, only after verifying its authenticity and ascertaining that there is news value in bringing such information to light. Interesting. Epic provides web services to many prominent right-wing fixtures online, including the media group One America News, the video site BitChute, the social media site Gab, and the message board Patriots.win. Other domains show links to targeted harassment campaigns of journalists or activists, including by falsely linking them to allegations of heinous acts. The company was used last month to register the domain for strikebackforfreedom.com, a campaign that attorney Lynn Wood, supporter of former President Donald Trump, has said on Telegram was bought by his Fight Back Foundation. The site says it is affiliated with Sidney Powell and other prominent purveyors of false conspiracy theories about election fraud and the coronavirus vaccine, and it urged people to stop doing business with the enemy, such as companies mandating that employees get vaccinated. A huge proportion of the 1.8 million domains shown in the breach data appear ordinary, with web addresses for people interested in real estate, home improvement, vegan cooking, various types of spirituality, as well as the occasional domain devoted to pornography, gaming, and cryptocurrency. Many do not appear to connect to active websites. Hacked documents showing details from nearly 1 million Epic invoices over the past several years underscore the high-volume, low-dollar nature of the domain registry business. While there are dozens of domains worth hundreds or even thousands of dollars, most are worth far less. Only about 2% of the invoices since 2019 were for more than $10. Nearly half were for less than $1. Among the more expensive ones was the domain of Patriots.win, now used for the pro-Trump site that sought to replicate a message board known as The Donald after its domain owner shut it down after the January 6th insurrection. A man listing an address in Louisville paid $413 for the Patriots.win domain in January, the invoice records show. He did not respond to requests for comment, and his identity could not be independently verified. Aubrey Kirtaner, Kirtaner, Aubrey Kirtaner Cottle, a security researcher and co-founder of Anonymous, who's, I guess, no longer anonymous, declined to share information about the hack's origins, but said it was fueled by hackers' frustrations over Epic serving as a refuge for far-right extremists. Everyone's tired of hate, Cottle said. There hasn't been enough pushback, and these far-right players, they played dirty. Nothing is out of bounds for them, and now the tide is turning, and there's a swell moving back in their direction. Shireen Mitchell, founder of Stop Online Violence Against Women, a group that has tracked online extremism since 2013, said the Epic hack is forcing a long overdue examination of internet service companies that haven't drawn the same scrutiny or talk of regulation as social media giants. While many researchers are using the data to look forward, including to push for consequences for the people behind the most toxic sites, Mitchell said she's left asking questions about why Epic for so long helped give a platform to extremist content on the web. We don't even have a true measurement of it, Mitchell said, the scope of online hate. We don't know how it started, how small it was, how it is amplified, and how big it is, which would also tell us how big it could get unless we do something about it. Interesting. Well, there's still quite a bit left to this, much more than I thought in this article. Let me scan it over the next 2 minutes and see if we return to it. Otherwise, jumping to a new topic.
Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. It makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see. I skimmed this a little bit more over the break, and, it's not like earth-shattering stuff, but it seems like it will become important at some point in the near future to have heard some of the names involved in this. And I don't know, that's worked out pretty often for us and prepared us pretty well for strange twists in the stories in the future. So maybe we'll continue with this. I had just been reading about the founder of Stop Online Violence Against Women, the founder, Shireen Mitchell, talking about, how come there hasn't been more accountability for more people? And we don't really know the extent of online hate speech and how it all connects, and so why a breakthrough like this might be really important. The role of Epic, will continue here, and other alternative internet services companies drew mainstream attention in the aftermath of the Unite the Right rally in 2017, when white supremacists who organized online converged on Charlottesville. Until then, domain registrars and web hosts had traditionally taken a hands-off approach to content unless it involved explicitly criminal activity, Byrick said. But the weekend's deadly violence sparked calls for tech companies to more aggressively police what they kept online. 1 year later, Epic's founder, whose last name, Monster, this part is of interest to us, is confirmed to be real in Washington state voting records. It might be that he changed it to that, but he really did do that. And also confirmed in a 1991 court judgment in New York. So if he did change it, it's been a while. Further involved himself in the debate after a mass shooting at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. As the nation recoiled at the attack that left 11 dead, Monster was mulling a different problem, deplatforming. He was deeply concerned that a right-wing social media site, Gab, had been knocked offline because the Pittsburgh shooter had been active there, sharing and spreading anti-Semitic hate until moments before the attack. In a blog post 8 days after the shootings, Monster praised Gab as a, quote, haven for free speech, and said its embattled founder, Andrew Torba, had acted courageously. Monster pledged that Epic would help Gab get back online, adding, let freedom ring. Oh boy. The move, similar to stands Epic would later take after other tragedies, including the live-streamed murders of 51 people in 2 New Zealand mosques in 2019, elevated the little-known domain registry in suburban Seattle to the center of a roiling national debate over big tech and internet freedom. It also made Epic a hero to many on the right and a target for many on the left. The result of this can be seen plainly in the celebratory tone used by the hacker collective Anonymous when it announced the breach, as well as the excitement of critics, both political opponents and extremism researchers, as they began attempting to reconstruct Epic's business from the vast quantity of stolen data that includes 843,000 transactions over more than 10 years, plus nearly 1 million invoices. The data, which is hosted online for public download, totals more than 150 gigabytes. The data includes internal memos describing apparent subpoenas from law enforcement agencies for information about Epic-registered websites, including 2 domains, the Donald.win and MAGA.host, in the weeks after the Capitol riot, January 6th. The notes do not include details of the subpoena's targets, the investigating agencies, or any alleged crimes. One of the internal notes, which appeared to have been written by an Epic employee, mentions a grand jury subpoena, a request to preserve records for 90 days, and a non-disclosure order, a court-approved document that law enforcement can secure to prohibit tech companies from telling customers what information they'd shared as part of the investigation. "Do not tell registrant," read the note, which did not include further details of the investigation. Some activists online also pointed to data showing that Monster's name and an Epic email address used for purchasable domains were included on web addresses such as robmonsterenablesnazis.com and nazimap.com. The Epic spokesperson said the company has used an automated system to add Monster's name to domains marked for sale or deletion, even though he has never owned the individual domains. That could cause some confusion. Epic also has a corporate overlap with Vanwa Tech, V-A-N-W-A, Vanwa Tech, a company that, according to online records, has provided internet services to the neo-Nazi site Daily Stormer, and 8kun, the central node for spreading conspiracy theories central to the QAnon ideology. Epic bought BitMitigate, a cybersecurity service that was protecting the Daily Stormer against online attacks, from Vanwa Tech's owner, Nick Lim, in 2019. Though Epic reportedly severed its relationship with the neo-Nazi site, Lim became chief technical officer of Epic for a time, while maintaining his ownership of Vanwa Tech, based in Vancouver, Washington. Lim told the Post that he remains a partial owner of Epic, and in a Bloomberg profile of him, he called Monster a kind of mentor. But an Epic spokesperson said the company does not currently have a relationship with Vanwa Tech or its owner. Vanwa Tech's data was not part of the Epic breach, Lim said. Asked if he still considers Monster a mentor, Lim told the Post, "Everyone in my life is a mentor, whether that is what to do or not to do. You can always learn something from everyone." This is a waffling answer. And not everything about everyone is good or bad. People can do both good and bad things. Nobody is perfect. Wow, that was really helpful. The domains listed in Epic's hack represent a broad spectrum of far-right extremism, including white supremacists, xenophobic groups, and anti-government agitators. Some users appear to have relied on Epic to lead a double life, with several revelations so far involving people with innocuous day jobs who are purportedly purveyors of hate online. Others, however, belong to high-profile extremist trolls who were deplatformed and found their way to Epic, where they continue to harass leftist activists, mainstream journalists, and other targets. Melissa Lewis, a self-described anti-fascist activist and writer in Portland, Oregon, said her family spent months feeling hunted by far-right troll and convicted hacker Joseph Joey Camp, whose name was listed on domain registrations with Epic and who has claimed publicly to have done freelance work for Monster. Lewis said Camp, whose targets have included not just far-left activists, but also conservative favorite Lauren Boebert. How about that? Representative Lauren Boebert of Colorado. So Lewis said Camp. Okay, Lewis is the researcher. Camp is the bad guy. Camp's targets have been not just far leftists, but also Lauren Boebert for some reason. Camp sent Lewis harassing emails, posted her home address, and disseminated photos of her online, resulting in Lewis being added to extremist hit lists. She said Camp also went after her father, an emergency room doctor, by posting the human resources number to his hospital and spinning tales about her dad letting cops and patriots die in the ER. Lewis said her father, too, began receiving death threats, prompting the hospital to take security precautions. Lewis complained to Epic last year with a rundown of Camp's alleged violations of the platform's terms of service. The company responded largely by dismissing her, explaining that there wasn't enough information to identify the harasser and suggesting that she was aligned with militant leftists who have marched in the street for the past year, burning down buildings and celebrating anarchy, which is supposedly not a reason for someone like Monster to, but suddenly it became a reason for him to not do anything. Anyway, that according to an email exchange reviewed by the Post. All of this is why Lewis greeted news of the Epic breach with relief and a measure of glee. The satisfaction, Lewis tweeted, was, well, she says, better than any orgasm. I don't know about that, but, I can't tell you what Lewis has been doing with her time. An Epic spokesperson said the company condemns persecution or targeted harassment and that it investigates and takes appropriate action after reports of abuse. The spokesperson said Monster hired Camp for an unrelated matter in early 2020 and that Epic had no knowledge of Camp's actions. But the spokesperson also said the company had reviewed reports of Lewis's claims and did not find a violation at that time. In a phone interview, Camp said that he had no comment on whether he had domains registered on Epic and that such information was easily falsified. Another person who claims that one. Camp also denied harassing Lewis or her father. After the call, which Camp recorded and posted online, he boasted of, quote, lying to the Washington Post and began harassing a Post reporter via text and social media. So I guess he just can't give that lifestyle up. For some reason, sounds like they have him dead to rights on that one. Okay, well, many other developments in weird news over the weekend. I don't know if I pocketed any of these, but I did retweet news from over the weekend of some, a new, I'll have to find it again, a new arrest in a weird and disturbing series of arrests among people sharing some rather extreme and vile child pornography. And you'll never guess with which political party they're affiliated. Well, it's the Republicans. Okay. So I don't know exactly what to make of this, but let me see. I'll go and grab this thing. I had originally seen it, injected into my timeline here by Jennifer Cohn, who is an election security advocate and writer and an attorney, and I see she puts together some long and elaborate threads, some of which I sometimes even have difficulty believing, but not always, but in some cases, yes. But then she was retweeting from the account that I also follow and occasionally think, well, okay, grain of salt again, but very often some helpful hints in the Twitter thread of, identified only as Mrs. Panstrepon. I have never figured out exactly how we're supposed to pronounce that. But this account exists in the same plane as Der Wuter. They both spend an awful lot of time trying to connect dots in what appears very often to be conspiratorial ways. But there's, as usual with most things, left or right, conspiracy theory-wise, a grain of truth somewhere. It's just that I find more grains in their work than I often do in right-wing conspiracy theory. But this appears to be backed up with Some facts, so we can stick to the factual parts here. Another arrest, Mrs. Panstrepon reports here. Another arrest in the D.C. child pornography ring. Raymond Thomas, a.k.a. D.C. Ray, was literally online sharing a horrific video with some of the other members of the ring when law enforcement knocked on his door on 14th Street Northwest, by the way. Not saying more, she says, until his identity is officially confirmed. But she includes a screen grab of the complaint filed here, United States in U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia, U.S. v. Raymond Glover, defendant. And sure enough, it makes some rather disturbing allegations about the nature of the child pornography he was distributing. The next tweet in the thread here says, this arrest was in connection with an 18-person child porn ring per the pretrial detention memo. 2 men, one who worked for the Republican Senate conference, I think is what we're getting to here, and one who worked for Turning Point USA, have already been arrested and entered into plea agreements, but have not yet been sentenced. So that's a pretty hard fact right there. In fact, the tweet that I first noticed from Jennifer Cohn was commenting on this second one, that there was a connection with Turning Points USA. Jennifer observing here, wait, someone who worked for Charlie Kirk's Turning Point USA, which often targets high school students for right-wing indoctrination, has been arrested in connection with an 18-person child pornography ring. Has TPUSA given a statement? They probably have not at this point. But, yeah, that seems pretty weird and worthy of mention here. Let me see, which of the two threads is most fruitful in following at this point. I'll continue with Mrs. Panstrepon here, who then says, includes an excerpt from another thread regarding the 2 Republican men arrested in November of 2020 and February of 2021, respectively, on child pornography charges. The one, I think, who worked for the... Yeah, which one is which? Who? Well, at any rate, let's see. Adam Hageman is the name of one of the people here, and in this tweet, in a photo with colleagues from... where? I'm not sure, but a photo inside the Trump White House, of course. I think with Turning Point USA personnel. Turning Point USA, of course, they're pointing out, being Charlie Kirk's organization. And he seems a little weirdly connected with the Falwell family as well. They, too, having their own strange run-ins with the Vice Squad, as it were. Let me back up again and see what else Jennifer Cohn might have to add to this. Adam Hageman was allegedly involved in a child pornography ring, according to a Politico article from July of this year, just by way of checking into that one. Former GOP Hill aide pleads guilty in child porn case. This one is actually about the second of the 2 defendants who have already entered their pleas but hasn't yet been sentenced. Ruben Verastegui. I'm guessing. Verastegui. I don't know. V-E-R-A, Vera. S-T-I-G-U-I. Ruben Verastegui. 27 years old at the time of the writing of this article back in July of this year. Facing 12 years or more in prison under a deal with prosecutors, so, nothing to sneeze at here, as is often the case with this sort of crime. A former GOP staffer and Republican National Committee aide pleaded guilty Friday to a child pornography charge and is facing 12 years or more in prison under a plea deal with prosecutors. This Ruben Verastegui guy entered the guilty plea from jail during a video conference held before U.S. District Judge Amit Mehta in Washington, D.C. Busy guy. He's handling, I think, a lot of the insurrectionist cases as well. I guess everybody is at this point. Verastegui, or whatever his stupid name is, admitted to possession of 152 videos and 50 images of child pornography and to receiving and distributing sexual depictions of children. I mean, that's a pretty solid set of charges there. Anyway, I mean, I don't know what you do with people if they're distributing it. It's like, I guess you end up facing 12 years in prison. That's what you should be doing with them. According to an affidavit filed in the case in February by a Department of Homeland Security investigator, he, Vaccinated, or whatever his name is, sought out images of rape of children during an online chat last year. I don't know what makes people want to incriminate themselves this way, but they do. Prosecutors said he also fantasized online about killing children while abusing them, so he's a great guy, working for the RNC, just in case you were wondering. The investigation focused on a ring of at least 18 people trading child pornography via a chat group on an unnamed website, probably hosted by Epic. Appears to have zeroed in on at least one other political staffer in Washington. Last November, a Trump Commerce Department political appointee, Adam Hageman, was arrested on charges that he shared child pornography videos and commented on sexually abusing children. Hageman appears to have been set to enter a guilty plea in April, but court records do not indicate that hearing was ever held. Meta accepted Vaccinated guilty plea, but deferred a decision on whether to accept the roughly 12 to 15-year sentencing range prosecutors and Vaccinated agreed to. Sentencing in his case set for October 12th. Prosecutors said earlier this year that Vaccinated could also face charges in Arizona over his online conduct, but the plea agreement he signed with the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington, D.C. precludes further charges in that state. Interesting. Vaccinated worked as a digital director for the Joint Economic Committee in 2018 and as digital strategist for the Republican Senate Conference from 2019 to 2020, congressional payrolls records show. He was also on the payroll of the RNC from 2017 to 2018, according to the FEC reports. So, you know, it's weird that the QAnon people seem so convinced that it's the Democrats involved in such things, when it turns out so much more often than not to be Republicans. So that's kind of odd. Just thought I would add that to your database. And, let's see. Okay. Maybe we'll use the last 10 minutes for something a little bit more substantive and to set the scene for the rest of the week. Happened to see praise being circulated for David Dayen's latest in the American Prospect. Interlocking crises in Congress have simple solutions. Oh, good. That's awesome. Actually negotiate the Biden agenda and put the debt limit out of its misery, advises David. Let's see if we can run through this quickly and before we run out of time for the day. Let's see. They estimate 8 minutes. Let's make it fast. Monday is what congressional reporters might call a day of decision, even though no decisions will actually be made. Dumb name for it then, but we'll see why. In the House, Monday is the prescribed deadline for a vote on a Senate-passed infrastructure bill with $550 billion in new spending over 10 years, using a very different set of figures. I like it. It's focusing on the new spending rather than the overall larger figure that really misrepresents what's going on here. 21 progressives have vowed to vote down that bill because it would break the deal of enacting both together both the infrastructure package and the Build Back Better Act, a public investment bill that represents nearly the entirety of the Democratic platform Biden ran on and won. We're talking, of course, about the reconciliation bill. A handful of Democrats who negotiated the infrastructure bill have stated vague objections to the Democratic platform, which has made it impossible to reach agreement. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, in a bout of optimism, has vowed to pass both the Infrastructure and the Build Back Better Act this week. And she's rarely wrong about these things. She instructed the Budget Committee to put together all of the elements of the bill that passed various committees in a markup on Saturday. Here is that legislation. It could go to the Rules Committee as soon as today. David just basically describing the reconciliation process there without saying so. But why not? Interesting way of reporting things. But this is a performative effort to show progress without progress being made. Assembling the House BBBA at least creates a leftward pull in the debate, but Pelosi has promised frontline members in her caucus that she would not force them to vote on a bill that exceeds what can be passed in the Senate, and those discussions have barely started. Last Wednesday, Senator Joe Manchin couldn't even give President Biden a top-line dollar amount he could accept for the package. Biden is forcing that conversation, finally bringing the Manchin Dems toward negotiating instead of posturing. But none of the 100-odd decisions you would need for a consensus have been made. Last Thursday, Pelosi and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer announced a deal, in quotes, on revenue pay-fors in the bill. I've been told that this created a menu of options, some from the House and some from the Senate, that could possibly be a start of a revenue package. It did not include provisions that create budget savings, like drug pricing reform, but that deal clearly doesn't cement what revenue measures will actually be in iterations of the bill or how much they will bring in. Witness the Senate Finance Committee trying to throw together a carbon tax and dividend over the weekend because they think it's all Senator Kyrsten Sinema will accept. Witness Biden touting an annual mark-to-market tax on unrealized capital gains for billionaires because Senator Ron Wyden whispered it to him at the meeting. There's nothing close to a consensus on the tax side, and Sinema reportedly even opposes rolling back the Trump tax cuts to raise the top marginal tax rate to 39.6% and increase the corporate tax rate above 21%, the easiest lifts in the entire package. If the right wing of the caucus won't agree to a spending figure, won't agree to pay-fors, and won't agree to anything else, it would be absurd for House progressives to assume enough progress to sign off on a BBBA and infrastructure, only to watch the Senate grind down the former while the latter gets the president's signature. In a Dear Colleague letter Sunday night, Pelosi set the actual vote for the infrastructure bill for Thursday, the same day the Surface Transportation Reauthorization that is attached to that bill expires. Some took this as a threat to whip progressives in line. Vote for infrastructure or highway funding gets cut off. But this should all be seen as contingent on progress on the Build Back Better Act. Pelosi won't put Build Back Better on the floor unless it has the votes. There's no forcing mechanism available other than making a deal. As we will discuss in a moment, there's another must-pass bill due the same day, on Thursday, and any surface transportation extension can be stuffed into that if necessary. If progressives get a deal on Build Back Better, they will vote for infrastructure. If they don't, there are other ways to make sure highway funding doesn't lapse, and everybody knows it. Pelosi's gambit is the kind of YOLO move you make when you have no other options, but the Biden agenda needs a breakthrough before it can move ahead for votes. That can only happen with actual negotiation to build trust and find something agreeable to all sides. Breakthroughs in Washington always come right after the threats, but it's not going to happen overnight and not by whenever Pelosi is scheduled on her calendar. She can, of course, still push things. That's true. In the Senate, meanwhile, there will be a vote late Monday afternoon, today, on a House-passed bill to fund the government until the beginning of December, a CR, provide Hurricane Ida relief, allow for the resettlement of Afghan refugees, and raise the debt limit. The bill will probably get 52 votes. The senators from Ida-ravaged Louisiana will vote for it, and not pass because Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell has made plain his desire to force Democrats to raise the debt limit on their own, so he'll be filibustering. There's no policy rationale to McConnell's stubbornness. It's mostly just a way to throw sand in the gears and stop the Biden agenda in whatever way possible. Of course, there's no policy rationale to the debt limit either. It's money already spent by the government that the country needs to borrow to finance. Appetite for U.S. debt is high, and default is impossible in a country backed by its own currency. There's just this stupid law, which is contradicted by another law. That would be the 14th Amendment that we discussed on Friday, but which nonetheless has held up as tradition that says you have to set a threshold of public debt to cover spending already incurred. Failure to do so would cause a catastrophic default and painful economic recession. Setting this limit has never altered policy on spending in the history of the United States. It's just a time bomb the Republicans like to light every time a Democrat takes the White House. Any Democrat shocked that Republicans wouldn't cooperate on the debt limit after they cooperated under Trump needs to leave politics and find another line of work. Do a little bit more here just to wind up. I won't make it all the way through. Democrats clearly prefer that both parties take responsibility for the debt limit, and they'd rather suspend it, which you can do under regular order, rather than setting it at a hard dollar amount, which is what you can do under reconciliation, and thus is perceived as a more politically fraught vote. I'd argue that no politician has ever lost their seat over a debt limit vote, but Washington has odd ideas about a lot of things. Anyway, here's what's going to happen after Monday's vote fails. Democrats would have until Thursday to pass the same government funding bill without the debt limit attached. Leadership has then been clear that such a bill will pass by Thursday night. The Treasury Department can use its extraordinary measures to provide borrowing room until around the end of October. Democrats can pass a debt limit hike with 50 votes through budget reconciliation. It's just a bit of a pain to do it because they didn't put the debt limit in the original budget resolution instructions. They would now have to amend that instruction and spend a couple of weeks on the floor votes getting it done, while hoping that Republicans don't boycott a key budget committee hearing so they can get a fix on the calendar. Easier solutions have been inexplicably ruled out, unfortunately. There's more about that, and I recommend that you read up on it in the last 3 or 4 paragraphs that I couldn't quite squeeze in, because it's time for justice.
JustWordsRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Well, you know the stuff that's in there. Standard stuff. Mint the coin, eliminate the filibuster, all the things that we're on the verge of doing every day, right? Well, the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy picks up where we leave off. Justice Putnam returning to the air, hopefully much healthier than he was last week. Got lots for you from all around the world, so stay tuned.